Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a huge topic, one that's about as personal and philosophically charged as it gets, the ethics of euthanasia. We're going to break down the core ideas that are clashing in this debate.
So let's just cut right to the chase. The entire massive debate really boils down to this one single question. Who gets to decide when a life ends? Is it you, a doctor, society, or is it a decision that's not even ours to make in the first place? This is the fundamental conflict we're going to unpack.
All right, to really get a grip on this, you got to start at the beginning, with the oldest, most foundational argument out there. It's the bedrock of so much of our thinking on this, and it's called the sanctity of life.
So what does that actually mean? Well, the core idea is pretty simple. Your life isn't your property, like a car or a house. It's more like a gift, something sacred that's been entrusted to you. You're the caretaker, the steward, not the owner. And so from this perspective, choosing to end that life, well, that's crossing a line, a divine one.
And you see this idea echoed in so many foundational texts. Take this one from the Bible. Your body is a temple. That's a powerful metaphor, right? The message is crystal clear. You don't just go and tear down a temple. It's not yours to destroy.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. You might think this sanctity of life thing is just one solid block of belief, but it's not. There's a real split. On one side, you have the strong view, which is totally absolute, no ifs, ands, or buts. Killing is always wrong. But then you have the weak view, which tries to bring something else into the picture, compassion. It basically asks, okay, life is sacred, we get that, but what if that sacred life is nothing but pure, non-stop suffering? Doesn't compassion for that person count for something?
And that very question, that's the perfect doorway into the main philosophical challenge to the sanctity of life. This next idea completely shifts the conversation. We're not just talking about whether someone is alive anymore. We're talking about the experience of being alive.
Yeah, thinkers like Peter Singer have really spearheaded this change in focus. Their argument is pretty direct. Is a life that's just existence with no consciousness, no chance of happiness, only pain, is that life truly of the same value as one filled with experiences and joy? You can see how the goalposts move here, right? It's less about a divine rule and much more about human suffering.
So how does Singer draw the line? Well, he makes a really key distinction. He says there's a difference between being a human being and being a person. For him, a person is someone who is rational, self-aware, and actually wants to keep living. So the great wrong of killing, in his view, is stealing that desired future from a person. But if someone has lost those abilities for good, or they rationally no longer desire that future, well, the whole argument against euthanasia starts to look very different.
Okay, but hold on. The moment you start making decisions based on something as subjective as quality of life, a massive alarm bell starts ringing for a lot of people. And this brings us to one of the most powerful counter-arguments in this whole debate, the slippery slope.
Critics like Archbishop Fisher laid out like this. Once you open that door, even just a crack, say for the terminally ill, it's almost impossible to keep it from swinging wide open. The fear is that the definitions of unbearable suffering or poor quality of life start to get wider and wider and wider.
And look, this isn't just some philosophical what-if. Proponents of this argument point to actual examples. You look at Holland, where the law started with terminally ill adults and about a decade later was extended to include babies with severe illnesses. Or you look at some of the really tough stories coming out of Canada, where people have reportedly applied for assisted death not just because of a medical condition, but because of things like abject poverty. This is exactly what the slippery slope argument warns about.
So what's the real fear here? At its core, it's this. In a world that's kind of obsessed with success and being independent, what if having euthanasia as an option creates this unspoken pressure? A pressure on the elderly, the disabled, the poor, to feel like they're a burden on everyone else, and that maybe they should just get out of the way.
Okay, so that's the fear. But what does the data say? Well, supporters of euthanasia push back hard against this. They'll point you to a place like Oregon, which has had assisted dying for decades. The argument is, if this slippery slope was real, Oregon would be the proof. But it's not. The numbers show it's actually incredibly rare. We're talking just 1 out of every 3,000 deaths. That hardly looks like a societal norm or some kind of widespread pressure.
And there's another really interesting piece to this puzzle from the Oregon data. Peter Singer points out that if the vulnerable people are being pressured argument were true, you'd expect to see the poor and marginalized overrepresented in the numbers. But you see the opposite. The people choosing assisted death are disproportionately white and well-educated. That suggests it's a choice being made from a place of control, not coercion. All right, that leads us perfectly to the third and final big idea in this whole debate. We've looked at the value of life. Is it sacred or is it about quality? Now let's shift gears and talk about control. Let's talk about the principle of autonomy.
This one really gets to the heart of how many of us think today. The idea is simple, but it's powerful. Just put aside the other arguments for a second and ask yourself this. Shouldn't you, as a competent adult, have the final say over your own life and your own body? I mean, isn't that the most basic freedom of all?
But just like before, it's not that simple. Autonomy can mean different things. You've got the hardline, absolutist view from philosophers like Nozick. They talk about self-ownership. It means your life is yours, full stop. If you're an adult and you're of sound mind, you get to choose. But then there's a more, let's call it a cautious view, from people like Mill and Singer. They agree autonomy is super important, but they say, wait a minute, its value comes from leading to good results. So if someone is about to make a terrible, irreversible decision out of, say, a temporary but deep depression, maybe, just maybe, we should step in to prevent a tragedy.
So, is there a way to bridge this gap? Maybe. That's where this idea of rational autonomy comes in. It's kind of a compromise. It says, yes, you have the right to choose, but, and this is a big but, that choice has to be rational. It has to be stable and well thought out, not a snap decision made in a moment of crisis. The thinking here is that this gives you the best of both worlds. It respects individual freedom, but also builds in a crucial safeguard against that slippery slope. So here we are. We're left with these three huge, powerful ideas, and they're often pulling in completely different directions. You have sanctity, the idea that life is a sacred gift. You have quality of life, which is all about compassion and ending suffering. And you have autonomy, the fundamental right to choose for yourself. There are no easy answers, which is what makes this so difficult. The question this leaves us with, as a society and as individuals, is when these three ideas clash, which one wins? Which one should guide us?